Okay, I will start our presentation. Is that? Yes. Thank you for joining the School of Living Zoomcast. The School of Living's mission as a nonprofit educational organization is to explore challenges of living, hold land and trust for present and future generations, and promote personal empowerment and support the development of just and sustainable communities. While there's no charge for the Zoom event, we appreciate a suggested donation of $20 or as you can to help support the work of School of Living. Better yet, consider becoming an active member of School of Living. You'll find the link for donation and membership in the chat box. Tonight's Zoomcast is Community Land Trusts and Reparations with Eric Jackson. This presentation is being recorded. Eric Jackson of Black Yield Institute will facilitate a discussion about how community land trusts, CLTs, can support and engage in obligatory reparations. Eric will frame the discussion by sharing the contemporary and historical context for reparations, as well as different pathways to reparations. Then we will dive into a discussion about what this can look like practically for CLTs, with a focus on School of Living's CLT model. Please consider supporting the work of Black Yield. The link is in the chat box. And Karen will now introduce Eric Jackson.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Stupski, and I'm a board member of School of Living. And I first met Eric at the Farm-Based Education Network conference last fall, where he gave an amazing workshop. It was very inspiring about the work that his group is doing and Black land sovereignty and food sovereignty. And we also saw a film that he made called Baltimore's Strange Fruit, which is about a story of food apartheid and the struggle for food sovereignty in Baltimore. So I was very, very impressed and excited with his work. He and some colleagues came out and visited Heathcote, and we had more dialogue there. So I'm just really thrilled that he's joining us tonight, and I'm going to read his formal biography here. He's an organizer, an educator, and a filmmaker, humbly serving as the visionary and a co-founder of the Black Yield Institute, committed to building a movement towards Black land and food sovereignty in Baltimore. Currently, he and his team are committed to a 1.25 acre urban agriculture operation and building a cooperatively owned grocery store in South Baltimore, while also conducting Black-led research, facilitating political education, and organizing an action network. Eric has over a decade of experience working in and with communities, operating programming and helping people to build power and address a myriad of issues, including food inequities. A Baltimore native from the Cherry Hill community, Eric is the recipient of numerous awards and a public speaker who has presented hundreds of addresses and workshops to diverse groups about food sovereignty, building power, and establishing strong organizations to address complex social issues specific to people of African descent. He is affirmed in and secured in this work through the love of his family and friends, and especially the brilliance of his queen, Diara, and 4 children, Orion, Irian, Amir, and Kamal. So I'm very, very happy that he's with us tonight, and I guess I'll turn the floor over to Eric.
All right, peace and good evening, everybody. Thank you, Karen, for the invite. Thank you for board members who accepted and those who are joining. I will. So again, my name is Eric Jackson, Brother Eric, as I'd prefer, or just Eric. I am serving director of Black Yield Institute, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do as we go along. But when I was asked to, have this presentation, or do this presentation, I was excited, and I still am excited about the possibility just having a conversation, really. And so for me, what I'm going to do is do a bit of just kind of framing, uh, hopefully percolating, some thoughts, offering some perspectives. But I want to say I'm not approaching this as an expert on reparations or a historian on, reparations. But I am just going to offer up some perspective. And I think for us at the Institute, one of the things that we always thinking about as we take very seriously our job as thought leaders is thinking about how the work that we do that is about materializing Black land and food sovereignty, how it actually can happen in real world scenarios, not just how it sounds, and how well we can articulate certain things or how well we talk about various approaches, but thinking about and being grounded in very real examples historically and contemporarily. And so what we're going to do today is just kind of talk a little bit about that, but just being clear that for me, I am very clear as a representative of Black Youth Institute, as an agent of Black Youth Institute, I'm clear that our work is about thinking about what does reparatory justice look like for Black people to acquire and think about the ways in which we can be in a different relationship with and on land as a power resource in this country. And so that is how I contextualize this conversation, and that's what it'll be pretty steeped in. So again, re-emphasizing that I'm not an expert, so at any point, if there's something that you want to question, challenge, push back on, I welcome all of those things, and even, collaborate in some thought. And so there's no form in that way. There will be a formal time for us to peel back these 4 questions that have been lifted up, or that I will be lifting up. And before that, just share some things. So I will stop here and ask, Karen, do you think that it'll be I know that you asked the question before we went on about people introducing themselves. Do you want to do that? The group doesn't seem to be particularly huge. And if so, I'll, turn it back over to you.
Sure. Yeah, we could do introductions. For the sake of speed, or making it more efficient, I could just read down the list of people, and maybe each person could just say your name, maybe your organization, or your role in School of Living, or what if you're with another organization, and maybe just what brought you here, very briefly. Okay, I'll start at the top and go down. Will Pearson.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm acting president, or maybe even real president now, of School of Living. My primary interest is in learning more about how equitable use of land can serve different populations. As I look to see what you're doing here, as I hear what you've been saying, Eric, and what I know of the School of Living, I'm working with a group out on Pine Ridge that is speaking the very same vocabulary. So there's different populations trying to go in similar sorts of directions. Check.
Okay. Daphne Plester.
Sorry, hello, and thank you so much for this. I'm really excited and looking forward to hearing the presentations. I'm based on Wasanich First Nation territory. I'm on the very west coast, southwest tip of Vancouver, Vancouver Island, kind of in the Gulf Islands there. So, and I'm on the coattails of Emily Artinian. We've done some work together on thinking through alternatives, alternatives in quotes, if you like, but perhaps the future for thinking about ownership of land, i.e. getting rid of the notion of ownership. So thank you, really looking forward to your presentations. Yeah.
All right, thanks. David Harper.
Hey, Eric and everyone. I am David Harper. I am a former board member from the School of Living, joined in about 2004, 2005. And I've had about 30 years career in the conservation land trust world and was really drawn to school living as a long-standing example of a community land trust that was dealing with land and dealing with human use of land in an ecological way. So that really was inspiring to me. Some of my current work after running a land trust here in South Carolina where I live is consulting with different landowners and different nonprofits, one of which is a group called the Agrarian Trust. And if you are familiar with Agrarian Trust, they're really looking to create a commons for land access in communities for beginning farmers to have long-term land security. So really great to be part of this conversation tonight. And a lot of my work now is also shifting toward Black, Indigenous, people of color access, especially community-based land tenure. So I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about, and have enjoyed recently working with Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, Stephanie Morningstar and her team. So glad to be here and glad to hear Eric.
All right.
Oh, and also Permaculture Living Lands Trust is a startup nonprofit I'm involved with, and School of Living is our fiscal sponsor.
All right. Emily A. from Street Road Artist Space.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here too. As Daphne Plessner mentioned, I've done work as an artist around ownership of land. Street Road is located a few miles from Stella Lou Farm, which is part of the School of Living. And we have done lots of wonderful collaboration together. I founded Street Road as an art space after inheriting land and a real estate business from my father. And it's a space that welcomes projects that create the status quo of land ownership today. Thanks. Looking forward to this.
Okay. Hannah Levasseur.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I live at Stella Lou Farm in Pennsylvania, which is one of School of Living's community land trusts. I live here with Jerome and Michael Ann, who you'll meet, and my daughter Zora and my grandma Zora. So we have 4 generations here. It's not inherited land, but we've been very fortunate to be here. And I also am the office manager for School of Living, and I'm looking to push our School of Living mission further.
Thanks. Okay, Herb Goldstein.
Hello, I'm Herb, and I've been involved with School of Living for 50 years now. I'm with the School of Living's Land Committee. I have some understanding of community land trust technical and legal issues, leases like that. And so I may be available as a resource in that department.
All right, thanks. Marie Tati of Stellar Roots. Let's see.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
This is Camilla of Stellar Roots, and that's Tatiana Loritati over there. And we are operating out of Stellar Roots Farm. You may see it as it's Sodai on the webpage of School of Living. Yeah, we have somehow, or at least it feels like we've inherited the land. So we're learning, we're new, we've been there 14 months. And a lot of us are first time land anything, or at least in our lifetimes. And so I'm excited, it's amazing. Looking forward to learning a lot, listening to you all and speaking as well.
Thanks. Michael Ann.
Hi, I'm Michael Ann, and we're at Stella Lou Farm. Yeah, we're really fortunate to be here, and became very involved in trying to move School of Living along, and I got really excited about a stronger commitment to social justice. And I just want to, through education, through work on the land, through our partnerships, to figure out how to grow School of Living to actually meet our vision for social justice. So check.
Thanks. Jerome, did you want to say anything else about?
I'll just mention I'm the treasurer at the moment of School of Living. I'm also involved, I'm part of the land committee, so I'm actively involved in the land management. And I have an interest here at Stella Lou to see how to make a homestead something that is sustainable for families in modern America with the financial obligations that come with existing, to see if it'll work.
Okay, thanks. Carol Maurer, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, wait, I do have a camera. I joined late, I apologize, I was coming home from work. But I live in Delaware, in Hocassin, Delaware, and I am part of Street Road Projects. And I'm interested, I know Stella Lou, I know all the fine folks at Stella Lou, and I'm interested, I'm looking forward to learning more.
All right, thanks. I think I got everyone. Oh, Derek, did you go? Derek?
Oh, no, I'm here. I haven't introduced myself yet.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Lindsay. I am an associate member of Heathcote. My two children, Willow and Kenny, live there. I live in Baltimore City. Literally right outside my window here is City Hall. I'm an activist and a community organizer. I am a co-founder of a nonprofit called Queers for Black Lives Matter. And so we're organizing an event right now for Breonna Taylor in September, and organizing some things with Baltimore City in the month of October as well. And then in my daytime job, I work for the National Aquarium, and I'm a sales manager and actually manage the private event rentals for that space. So really excited to be here. Thank you for taking the time to put this together for us. Definitely looking forward to hearing from you, Brother Eric, and from the group.
All right, thanks. So is there anyone that I missed? Okay, I think that's everyone. So turn it over back to you, Eric.
Cool, thank you. And thanks to everybody for sharing. So I just want to bring attention to this. It's a bit of, I guess like a bookmark, if you will, nice colorful image, but it is certainly, when I talk about Black land and food sovereignty, this piece actually is called A Vision of Black Land and Food Sovereignty. And so I want to say that, as you can see in this picture, some might even see it as utopian. I see it as very real as we continue to build power and have different relationships with and on land. But you can't do any of this stuff without it. And so we'll, if there's questions about this, we can wait until the end, because I literally have that same slide at the end as a placeholder as well. So we can definitely talk about that, but let's get into it. So we're gonna talk about reparations, reparatory justice, and community land trusts. I have these goals for our session that we would, just have some very high level understanding of the concepts of reparations as I understand them. People might have other ways that we define them, but what I'm hopefully interested in doing beyond just defining words, but giving meaning to words and concepts. And we're going to talk about that. and then also get, talking about some historic and contemporary examples of, reparations and what that looks like at various levels in our society. And then talk about, how it is necessary. And then also lastly, talk some questions. But before I do that, I'll give a little bit more context about Black Youth Institute and kind of what we do. Our organization is, our mission is twofold. It is to address what we consider as food apartheid that people experience, particularly Black and Brown people. And in this context, Black people experience all over the world. But in the context of Baltimore, where we're headquartered, you have those who are so-called live in food priority areas, these healthy food priority areas. This language that's been used, 89% of the people who live in these areas are Black people. And so we're talking about a race issue. And so we're clear that our work has to be about dealing with food apartheid, which is largely about power rather than about the presence or the lack thereof of certain food amenities. We believe that is a symptom rather than a root cause, meaning the lack of, certain foods or lack of certain institutions. That's the one fold. And then the second fold is building movement toward Black land and food sovereignty. So there's resistance, and then there's also imagining new and building for something new. How we're doing that actively, we have two projects that we're doing that we consider are the work that kind of directly kind of impact the day-to-day occurrence of limited food access and limitations to land, arable land. And those are our people's urban agriculture work and our food susu organizing work, which currently our sole project is erecting a cooperatively owned grocery store in South Baltimore. And then the farm, Karen mentioned a little in my bio that we have an 1.25 acre farm that we're producing food and providing food and distributing food in our community. And then we have 3 other initiative areas that we work out of, and those are our works around political education, Black food research and knowledge creation, and our work on building an action network. We believe that is that movement building side, right? So we got to be able to tell our own stories through research, and that is qualitative and quantitative. And then we also need to, we have to be able to engage in coalition or action network building, as I like to use that language, and also have collective consciousness and relationships through political education with our St. Cara Hamer Academy. Again, if there's anything that folks want to ask, we can talk about those later. I just want to give people a flavor of kind of who we are and why it makes sense for me as an agent of Black Youth Institute to be talking about and so I mentioned this before, so I won't spend a lot of time, but our solutions to problems mirror each other is the nutshell of this slide, right? If we see that the problem is about power, then our solution has to be about restoring and or building power and power resources. And I don't think that you can have a conversation about building power in this country, in any country in the world, but particularly in the context of our country, in the context of the state, and the context of the municipality or the city that I live in, without talking about land. It's not possible for us to do that. That's one of the most essential power resources that's available. And the way that Dr. Amos Wilson, a psychologist who passed on in the 1990s, written a lot of books, but he wrote this one book that I would flag for people to check out if you're interested. It's called Blueprint for Black Power. He essentially says in that book that those power rests at the level of our the social needs and social desires, and those who can afford or those who can meet those needs and or preclude people's access, or preclude people from being able to access those things, are people with power, right? So for those who provide for our security, our food, and all of those things, those are the people with power. It might be, simplistic for some folks, but I think that with less than complicated understanding, the truth is in order to build power, in order for us to get to really show what it looks like for Black lives to matter, what it looks like to have racial equity, what it looks like to have equal rights, whatever we call it, sovereignty, land has to be a part of that conversation. And so one pathway of doing that is through reparations. And I want to just kind of lift up just some, so that we start at a place that I think, we could just, that makes sense. I try to be as simple as possible. I think most of us know what reparations are. I'm just gonna kind of go through it for the listening audience or for those who will look at the archive video. And I have these pictures of, or this one picture of Dr. George Washington Carver, who was, I mean, a lot of people will remember, that's the peanut guy, and while that is true, the deeper story about the peanuts and the other legumes and tubers, sweet potato in particular, that were used was about replenishing the soil that was in disrepair as a result of I would say, the dishonoring of Southern land in the United States of America. That happened through a lack of stewardship and a lack of respect for the land by just growing things that would extract from the land, like cotton and tobacco and other things, without doing a good job of replenishing the soil of those nutrients that were necessary. And as a scientist, what he did was develop agricultural practices that would not only feed the people and have functional use beyond just eating, as we all know, peanuts and lots of different things, even other are used not just for the soil and for people eating, but also for products, that we use in our everyday life to this day. And so we owe, in terms of saving the agricultural tradition and saving the lands in this country, we owe that to not only, this great doctor, but also to the work that he did and those who kind of who followed suit in that through, Tuskegee, the Tuskegee Institute, and then Tuskegee University, and those who've learned and continued the traditions. But I start with that story or that narrative because that relationship was about restoration. It was about repairing something that was broken. And we're going to talk about that as we talk about reparations. But again, even in that relationship, I don't think that there was a fully realized restorative relationship, because I don't think that, not I don't think, his scientific trailblazing doesn't get the type of respect and honor that I think it should. And this is one platform that I choose to share that, so that we lift that up. And I hope that you all will continue to share that story. So that's how we honor our ancestors. So with that, I want to go into definition, but again, going beyond definition and borrowing from what the sister Adar Ayera says. She said people recite definitions without knowing the meaning. I don't want us to do that in this conversation. And so I want to, so when I talk about reparations, what we talk about is a process of repairing something or making amends for wrongdoing, right? So I put those, I guess, Webster, Merriam-Webster would say, like definition A or B or 1 and 2, or however we, delineate those. But we should understand that reparations, at its purest form, is either making amends for wrongdoing that ultimately seeks to repair a particular relationship or repair something that is impaired or broken. So this is a quick analysis. In the United States of America, reparations usually happen through money, tax relief, and or land grants or some kind of land, and in some cases an apology, a public apology, particularly from the federal government or state, municipal or some other, government, or it could happen through an institution, and we'll talk about some of that. And as I was kind of preparing for this, I guess one of the things that kind of came to mind for me, specifically from the standpoint of the federal government, it seems that the federal government kind of only honors the type or only honored reparations historically with groups that have been wronged through war or through colonialism, and or at least a narrow definition of colonialism. I would argue that we're still dealing with colonialism, extractive economics that I imagine, or at least are part of this conversation or dovetails this type of conversation, is certainly indicative of the colonial formula, if you will. And so I think that that's just something to note especially if we're interested in critiquing how reparations have happened in this country. Specifically from a governmental standpoint, I want to re-emphasize that, because I'll show on the next slide that reparations haven't always just happened through governments. It's at different, at the various levels, but it's also happened through institutions and family and so-called individuals as well. Are there any things that folks want to share right now before I go to the next slide, or any questions that folks have? That's like burning questions. I also want to respect people's time.
I'm not seeing slides. Sorry about that. I've just got a picture of you, but not of slides right now.
Okay. Is everybody else experiencing it?
I see the slides.
We have no trouble seeing them here.
Yeah, I see. Change your view.
I see them okay.
Okay, got it. Sorry, I had the wrong view on.
Yeah. All right. So you'll see some pictures here. I'll talk about some of these specific federal interventions. So here are a few examples of reparations historically, and then some, contemporary examples. So I break them down for the purpose of this presentation, these three different categories, if you will, of reparations. And you have governmental, that happens at all levels, institutional and familial or, individual. When we talk about government, I mean, some of you all may be, again, more astute and know the details of these, but I just want to kind of give some examples. These are not meant to go super deep, but if folks have questions that respond to, I will. Otherwise, I will just, keep it at a surface level. But just two examples that I have for federal government reparations happen with Japanese American citizens after atrocities of World War II, and through First Nations or indigenous peoples as a result of agreements on, I don't know if I would say agreements, but as a result of the land theft and displacement. And I would just want to add a disclaimer that the words atrocities, land theft, or displacement did not show up in any of the congressional acts that allowed for these reparations to happen. But in both of these cases, I lift up these examples. These aren't the only examples, because they provide two different types of issuance of reparations. So reparations were issued to Japanese Americans in the form of actual dollars, and some other amenities. And then with First Nations groups, typically through tribal groups and tribal governments that issued out to its people, and in some other ways through there are some debates about how effective these reparations were, and then with some tax reliefs and things of that nature. In terms of state, there's one example that I'll lift up. Folks may be familiar with the Rosewood massacre in Rosewood, Florida, where the community of Black people were tortured and massacred by physically violent mobs of white people who, you know, not only killed them, but, you know, decimated their lands and their properties. There's actually a pretty good movie. I actually was first introduced to it from the movie back in the 90s. So if folks are interested, there's a movie called Rosewood. There are, you know, several works on this massacre, but the state of Florida issued not only an apology, but also reparations to the descendants of the people who experienced the atrocities. And then in terms of a city example, municipal example, in Chicago, there's an example of offering reparations to people who experienced police brutality in the 70s and 80s. And in some of these cases, not all of them, there have been other tactics, of course, not just kind of lobbying the legislative branch of the government, but also, or either of those governments, but also happened through litigation as well in those governmental examples. In terms of institutional examples, two of them, one being Georgetown University, it was pretty high. I don't even remember how long ago it was, but a few years ago, Georgetown University decided to, you know, provide reparations in several forms to the descendants of people and enslaved Africans who helped to build the university. And I know some people got a chance to go to school for free. There were some apologies, and I believe even students had a significant role in making that happen, and pretty much made a decision on their own to do that, to essentially pay you know, some kind of restitution for the Georgetown University's role in the enslavement of Africans. And then a more, and those both were actually contemporary. Like I said, Georgetown, this was, I mean, no more than 5 years ago. And then there's an organization currently that folks might be familiar with called Resource Generation, which is a national group that has some affiliates throughout the country that gift money. These are particularly younger folks between 18 and 35 who have, you know, wealth and class privilege, and in some cases race privilege, and they, you know, gift money and other resources, including land and other, you know, power resources to Black, Indigenous, and people of color efforts and organizations. And so those are examples of institutional reparations. And then, you know, thinking about, I kind of generalize it by saying, because I have in my own experience, few examples, but through secondhand knowledge, examples of families and individuals endowing money or through bequests, leaving money to organizations to do Black liberation work or to do social justice work, not just through foundations, but directly to these efforts, and specifically with a specific focus on the recognition of their privilege and what the privilege afforded them, and then utilizing that to support people who have been, those groups that have been, you know, damaged socially, politically, and economically by various forms of oppression. So those are just some examples, again, just really touching the surface. But if folks have any other examples that you want to lift up, please do that. Or if you have any, you know, questions about any of these examples in any of these categories.
This is Karen. I have a question. As we were getting ready, we were looking at some kind of a UN definition of reparations. And I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I thought I read that it was not applicable to the descendants of the people who were harmed, but it was only for the actual people who were harmed. And so I'm wondering if, I notice here that the descendants in several of these examples did receive the reparations, which I think is great. I think it should be that way. I'm just wondering if you've heard anything about descendants being excluded from reparations.
So that's a debate.
Okay.
right? I mean, so in some of the, as you said, Karen, some of the examples you do have where it was strictly only, those who experience. And I think there were, there's an example that I didn't share. It was, let me just look at my notes really quickly. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920 was one example where only, those who were impacted by like, the native Hawaiians who were impacted by um, colonialism and conquest on the island had their lands restored, and in some cases, beyond that example, there's a debate of like whether descendants would get it versus the direct folks, and that's part of really the debate around why certain people should get reparations versus if they should not. And I think that it's a misstep, in my opinion, to not include that as a part of the definition, considering that we're talking about residual effects of, in some cases, sexism, racism, classism, created, literally created. Well, it was legislated in some cases, and in other cases, enacted by some other kind of social policy that create that have created the kind of the disparities in access to resources and access to and when I say resources, I'm talking power resources. I'm talking money. I'm talking about land, property, means of production, all of those things that matter in a capitalist frame. Um, I think, I think it's a misstep, but that's, I haven't looked at the UN's definition, but if I had something to do with it, I definitely think it should be broadened and applied to those who are impacted by the original wrong, and the perpetual wrong in some cases, especially in the case of the enslavement of Africans and the displacement of indigenous peoples and in other areas too. But those are the two off the top of my head that I think it has to be applied to.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And I just want to clarify that I'm not sure if the UN definition excluded the descendants or not. I just know that one of them that we read did. So I'm not sure the exact source.
Yeah. No, I got you. And whether it's the UN or where else, I agree. I think what you're speaking to is definitely something that people have debated for decades now, for a long time. Even, I mean, over, 100 years or so, or close to 100 years, debating about what that needs to look like. And I think there's even conversations about this, our country having, being, a social welfare state, right? Like, that as a part of the debate. But I know we don't have as much time, but very good point. Any other thoughts, questions before I move on? Okay. So I want to talk about, so we talk about reparations and issuing restitution to people, groups, at these different levels. I want to talk about it being a framework as a part of one's, day-to-day practice in our organizations and our institutions. And so I just give this really quickly. I kind of talk about it being this radical reciprocity, right? That usually comes, or that comes through our time, our tokens, and our talent. And in other interpretations, we're talking about through, free voluntary labor, through money and resources, and through the sharing of skills, and by sharing of skills, meaning utilizing skills to help build institutions or build whatever is whatever a group. For example, if you're helping a group build housing, lending carpentry skills, but then also sharing that with people, so that then you're not only creating a relationship where you're helping, but then you create, you limit dependence. And then also when I think about, and I don't have this here necessarily, but also thinking about access to networks as well, right? So when I talk about reparatory justice frame, we're thinking about, considering the ways in which systems of oppression create privilege for some of us, and then co-creating space that allows those who have a higher position or more privilege or more power under that specific construct, right? And so we don't have time to get into it, but thinking about power constructs, race, class, sex, age, all of these different social constructs that we ascribe power to specific members of that particular identity group. Thinking about your position and those who have a higher position being, especially with the goal of justice in mind, equity in mind, being obligated to share that which our privilege has afforded us to. And it kind of resists this extractive approach and looks at rejuvenation um, rather than kind of just taking from folks, and rather than asking folks to do things for free, actually paying and or figuring out some other compensatory arrangement. So when you think about that, the reason I lift this particular slide up is because I think that in some conversations, especially um, you know under the auspice of the larger conversation about governments, specifically federal government, owing people restitution for oppression over time, namely the descendants of American slaves or so-called slaves or enslaved Africans, as I would say. Um, I think that those kinds of conversations, people often just get fixated on reparations being handed down through checks or tax relief or free healthcare, free education, or whatever, however that plays out, and forget to think about the ways in which institutions, families, and so-called individuals or independent members of our society can give of themselves. And one example of that I mentioned earlier is resource generation. It's like, well, how can folks give that will help to stabilize, restore, and or create equity? And so this reparations frame, I think, is important, especially as we move closer to having this conversation about what community land trust can do to help. Um, uh, I don't want to say even the playing field, because that is one too cliche, and that's not necessarily the pursuit. But to create some level of equity, we have to think about the framework and what that looks like in our day to day, and how that plays out in our organization's policies, procedures, and practices, and how we can actually on our own operate from a repertory frame before we're asking governments and other larger institutions to do it, wondering how we can do that in our day to day lives and in our own institutions. Um, so, um, I'll summarize this. The time definitely is getting past, but I'll summarize this by essentially saying that we absolutely, in a conversation about land trust, have to talk about justice really coming through the sharing of land, considering and reconciling the histories specifically of Black people and Indigenous peoples and other people of color through displacement, through forced free labor, and just straight out theft. These are just some examples and statistics, but I think that it is necessitated, right, if you will. It is necessary and made necessary for those of us who are committed to justice, and for those of us who are committed to liberation, to sovereignty, to equality, whatever we want to call it. If we are to get there, we have to talk about land, and it's a part of our social justice work, our anti-racism work, our restorative justice work. Reparations has to be a part of that. So I'm gonna stop there, see, get people's reactions, and then we can get into some of this facilitated conversation. I did a lot more talking than I intended, and I apologize, but I want to make sure that we have enough time um, to kind of address some of these questions, and have you all as a group, as a unit, in your independent institutions that are associated with School of Living, or just in your own household, think about what this means to you. So, any reactions, any thoughts before we get into the questions?
Can I jump in? I don't know if I can be heard or.
Yes, you
Oh,
can.
okay. Thank you so much. Really, really, thank you very much for your presentations. Really, really great. Really wonderfully crisp and clear, and so agree with you about the fundamental issue of inequalities around land and notions of possession of land. I just wanted to say I mentioned earlier that I'm on Wasanich First Nation territory, and I want to kind of maybe if we can unpack some of these gestures or these statist gestures of reparation that are kind of expressed through a kind of one-off gesture of paying out, X amount to a particular group, etc. And I think what's always kind of in the back of my mind, really, in thinking about these things, is how easy that is for the state to kind of perform a kind of, oh yes, we're good liberals, So there's a kind of self-congratulatory kind of dimension to it. But I'm also interested, there's a very good book written by a man called Arthur Manuel, who was is First Nations, and he was deeply involved in the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and also instrumental in the UN Declaration for the Rights of Aboriginal Peoples, which Canada, by the way, and the USA and Australia dragged their heels and didn't want to sign up to. And why is that? Obviously because of land and the fact that we're on stolen land. So, but the thing that I would like to kind of have your thoughts on would be actually finding strategies that of reparation that really do more fundamental work of addressing some of the infrastructural inequalities that persist. So I'm thinking Arthur Manuel, he proposes that because we pay land taxes when we own property or whatever, you pay land taxes, and that those taxes are obviously processed and acquired and kind of and financially enrich the municipalities, etc. And with it goes all kinds of forms of labor where, certain types of people, in essence, and I think that's probably very racialized as well, but labor is divided out around the maintenance of the land, which usually, as you quite rightfully pointed out, has a very extractive kind of approach. So Arthur Manuel suggests that actually part of those land taxes be rerouted to the indigenous peoples upon whose one's land, where one resides. Yeah. So so instead of, for instance, if I pay $1,000 a year to my local municipality, that at least, he's arguing, at least a portion of that be redirected to, in my case, it would be the Wasanich, to their leadership council, etc. Yeah, right, that's him. Thank you for sharing the screen. And I'm just kind of curious about your own thoughts and from your own position and your own locale, really, about if you could just sort of help me understand, like, what are there kind of more kind of direct kind of infrastructural kind of specific examples that could go with, how can I say, target the kind of structural racism that persists through land and possessions of land? I'm just curious. I mean, maybe it puts you on the spot a bit because, it's another kind of example, but I just thought perhaps maybe there are parallel discussions around how to reroute the kind of the fundamental infrastructure that disseminates wealth in a starts to chip away at some of that statist kind of system.
Yeah. So I'll be honest. I think, these are part of the reason why I looked up Arthur Manuel is because I'm going to go back to it. I haven't read his work, and I can't even answer that question right now.
Yeah.
I think that because I guess for me, part of the reason why I can't is because I think that for me, we're trying to do both ends, right? We wanna figure out how to establish what we can in the world as it is and get to the world as we want, right? And so sometimes for me, I'm in the day to day bogged down with trying to figure out, well, what can we do with what we have in the here and now? How do we utilize litigation and relationship with land grant institutions to ensure that when I say we, not just Black Youth Institute, but I'm thinking Black farmers, I'm thinking Black folks doing food work, what they have at our disposal. But also, I think the part of the reason why I can't answer that question is because we're still organizing an action network of folks to figure out what our ultimate goal is, right? In terms of like, well, what does sovereignty look like for us between 2021 and 2025? That question hasn't been answered from an operational standpoint. And so at some level, I mean, I got to do more thinking about it, but also I try to, while I always live in my head, as you may imagine with some of the philosophical stuff I brought up here, I try to, balance that with the truth that I can't speak or represent a people. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so, and I'm not even going to try to. So with that being said, yeah, I got to do more thinking about it and would love and welcome the opportunity to talk more about it. But I really love that opportunity. I just don't have a lot of faith in the government structures that we have right now. And I just don't at all. And so a lot of the tactics that we think about kind of comes out of some of the other things that I mentioned loosely, and that is, how do we, away from governments, which, kind of play that game around, it's about political will for government. So then my focus is on at the institutional level and at the familial and so-called individual level. And so what we are working on there is establishing relationship with folks, so that we're able to have that we're connected to networks, that we have a pipeline of, skills and talents that are part of, our collective. But yeah, I got to think about that some more in terms of the infrastructure stuff and how do we, that pipeline that runs from government to the people.
I just want to quickly add, I don't want to take up all the time, but just that your outlining of the kind of basic principles that you're framing, I think are really, really dynamic and healthy and actually fundamental, to really being, cutting out new territory, if you like, and, really establishing a kind of formidable resurrection, if you like, for justice. I'm very impressed, actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Other reactions or anything before we get into questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick conversation about the work I'm doing with some of the folks out at Pine Ridge right now, and applying for a grant from what's referred to as the NDN Collective, which fits in your model of a group that collects grants from other places and funnels it into tribal activities. And one of the constraints that they're putting on a proposal that I'm working on is, what is the community understanding of food security? What does the community define as essential to food security? And the difficulty is really one, I think, going back to what you're saying, of power, because the folks, in my appreciation, my understanding, and it's very peripheral at best, is that there is little community understanding. It is all at the individual family level, and that there's a lot of antagonism between families, between individuals. So to say, what does the community think, presumes there's a community, and that's largely been destroyed by the power structure.
No, that's real. And I think, without going into culprits and all of that, I think that I agree with your analysis and your observations. And I would say that the best way to do that, or at least, no, I won't say the best way to do that, the way that we've seen or at least chosen to approach a collective definition of what does, in our case, what does sovereignty look like? Because I would argue that sovereignty, or in other words, control of resources or control of the decision making of what food resources and land resources are available and or that flow through our community. You would have security if you have power, right? You know what I'm saying? You can have quote unquote security as defined by large institutions, including World Health Organization and others, and still not have power, right? Folks, you're still having corporations actually providing the food for the people, which we still have. But I think the best way that we've decided, or that we have decided in the here and now, is bridging gaps across organizations that are doing land-based and food work in the city, so that we have a collective definition of what that is, and moving from there. It's been a long road of communicating with legislators, public servants, just using the different language. We're starting to make some headway, but I think that that's really some of the, one of the biggest challenges is around language. Now, we argue that we got to be able to speak our own language and assert what we mean by certain things, because philanthropic community, government, others essentially are defining for us what is available and what we the frameworks that we operate from. So, for example, when I talked earlier about the problem mirroring the solutions and vice versa, ultimately what you see is an overemphasis on food charity rather than infrastructure projects that provide food for families and for communities. And the framing is an individual one. It comes from the state, so I don't, I'm not surprised, but we take the approach that the smallest unit of society is the relationship, not the person. So we, in our organizing, we kind of operate from that standpoint. And so building coalition is the best way to do that, and figuring that out, plus working and chipping at those decision makers by being on their committees, but also by being just for right. Give, if you're going to give money to something, help us build this thing rather than uh giving us giving us something. So insourcing rather than outsourcing. So all that to say, I don't know, I think that I don't know, I think you're right. And we just got to do more organizing. Kwame Ture said, organize, organize, organize. That's what we got to do. And it's going to happen over time. But yeah. So I want to, for the sake of time, try to get into some of these questions. If folks can, we'll take a stab at it, I guess. But my first question is, what's the utility of community land trusts, of the approach in establishing and continuing? Because I know that in some cases, people have already established, some ways of issuing reparations. How can community land trusts, and how could the approach be used to do that? Anybody?
Yeah, this is David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I see Emily. Emily want to chime in as well. So yeah, David, then Emily, please. And then it looked like Will was going to say something as well. No, okay.
So just thinking about the ways that community land trusts can support sort of land access for beginning or Black, Indigenous, people of color farmers, whether it's urban or rural or suburban settings. I think that's an excellent place to start, is looking at some of the funding opportunities that are already out there. So if a community land trust is eligible for a grant through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, it might be the socially disadvantaged farmer and rancher grants that they just closed, but they'll be open again next summer. I mean, those can be multi-year grants that are, you know, literally $450,000 grants with no match required. And that type of grant, if it's presented the right way, could map out an entire strategy for land access in a given community or a given region. And it can also include real efforts to build a strategy based on acquiring specific pieces of land. So I just think there are a lot of skills that community land trusts and conservation land trusts have that are all about land acquisition, land stewardship, land financing, land leasing, and those skills can be transferred as part of the grant funding as well. That, you know, the part of reparations is transferring knowledge, because knowledge is power. And part of that includes just helping get major grants to do it.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't ask, but Karen, are you cool to write down the responses as you interpret them?
I think Karen lost her connection. I got a note that she lost power.
But we
Okay, cool.
are recording this, so we'll get it all.
Cool. Emily, you were gonna say something. Thank you for being patient.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, just wanted to let you know I'm here, and I will take some notes.
Just briefly, David covered sort of the point I was going to bring in, but I don't know a lot about community land trusts. It's been a steep learning curve through our great friends at Stella Lou, but I understand that they actually have fairly strong networks, and maybe somebody who's involved more closely with community land trusts could speak to that a little bit, because I think that sort of like kind of amplifying that kind of power through the networks across the United States and beyond kind of is really important, it seems to me. Thank you.
Yeah, I just decided I would like to throw in one note. In my experience, and it's fairly brief with community land trusts, is that that a community identifies land or holds land in trust, but it's largely used by individuals. So that one way that the utility could be moving towards reparatory justice is focusing a community on what touches an individual. So that, again, we get back to the whole relationship between communities and individuals, but in this case it's kind of reversed, in that the community is designed, or the community land trust enables a community to help an individual rather than separate them.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. Others? Utility of the approach to achieve reparations in one form or another? Thank you, David, Emily, and Will.
Well, this is Karen. I was thinking that with the School of Living model specifically, the way that we're set up is with the lands that are in our land trust, all the lessees pay a lease fee for using that land. And that lease fee builds up into a fund that can be used to acquire more land. And so those funds can be put towards acquiring the land that's going to be used by BIPOC people. So to create more access, that land fund that already exists can be dedicated to more access for Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
Okay, I appreciate it, and thank you for the good segue into the gold card question. Of essentially, it looks like somebody might have another question, but or another thought. Sorry about that, y'all. I'm trying to move my you move the videos. All right, there we go. So how can trusts transition more land into Black ownership and utilization? So yeah, Karen, you kind of when you talked about that dead on. Does anybody have any other thoughts about that, other than that? There's a structure built into that saves money and could potentially do that. Are there other ways that are explicitly answers this question? I know the first one was a little general, but this question is a little more specific.
I just want to say that we're currently working with BIPOC community, Stellar Roots, and that's, I guess, where my focus is. And I didn't want to leave that unsaid.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think the question is, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to celebrate and question being generally, and whether it's your independent efforts at, SOL or other folks, how could community land trust in general, the strategy, the approach, get more land, to Black folks in particular? If folks want to add, indigenous and other people of color, cool. But specifically, how do you all think we can do that?
I just note in your gold card, and I'll also speak to the green card, that you mentioned Black ownership. And I think that's kind of a problematic question in community land trusts. The community holds the land.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the community, and this is something I'm dealing with the Native groups all the time, is if the community board of directors is majority Black, that's one consideration. Where I'm working, if our board of directors is majority Native, that's a different situation. But when you say Black ownership of a community land trust land, I wonder if you've got some deeper thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you said already. It's not no magic to it. It's I don't have as extensive knowledge as many of you all on this call, but I know that my very little knowledge, there are at best multicultural CLTs. So I want to presume that CLT helping folks get land doesn't necessarily mean transferring to another CLT. A Black co-op, you know what I mean, like producer co-op or something like that. But yeah, yeah. Hope that answers your question.
This is Karen again. I mean, one thought I keep thinking about a lot in terms of how, for example, School of Living can transition more land into Black utilization is by Black people joining the existing communities. That's how pretty much most of us got our access to the School of Living land, is simply by joining the corporation or the entity that has the lease with School of Living. So, because people can move in and out of these communities pretty easily without any, official transfer of land or having to pay property taxes or things like that. You just join the community and you get access. So that's an easy way for someone,
what,
an individual anyway.
yeah. But my
I think
pushback
Emily
would be,
had a question.
go ahead, Emily, my bad.
Yeah, I have kind of a response to that too. First, I would just say, kind of reiterate what I was saying before. I think it seems to be important that the annual conferences, I think there are 2 in the United States for community land trusts, are addressing this issue and having panels on it and having discussions. I don't know if they are, but maybe somebody from the School of Living could speak to that. And then I just wanted to sort of say that, like, that's in response to Karen's point. I think, like, one thing that I'm learning quite a lot in all of the dialogues that are going on at the moment is that it's not easy. Like, and I think we have to have that conversation. It might not be easy for an individual to join, even if it might appear to that, if to those of us who have different kinds of privilege. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I concur, and not just financially, but also just like culturally. It might just very well be that, like, hey, you know what? Yeah, like, I mean, CLTs and particularly intentional communities, from my direct experience, and of course not as a member, but from being in this space and being connected to different folks, are largely white spaces, and not just white in terms of the people, but it's acculturated white. And so to ask somebody essentially to join something that it's almost by virtue exclusive, right? And not intentionally, but in essence, that way. Derek, I see you unmuted, so I know you'll speak to it. But I will also just say to in response to Karen and also to Will, I think that I guess another question I would ask is, what if Black people want their own? Do Black people deserve it? How can people support that, even if folks are like, I don't want to do it the way that you do it? And are folks willing to do that? These are rhetorical questions for you all to consider, but these are things I think nevertheless that should be considered. But I'll step out of the way, Derek. I'm sorry about that.
You're fine. So I was thinking to myself that about, as a Black man, when I first thought about the idea of intentional living or living in a different way, and just started to look into this. Like, I started to do research on my own. I have 2 kids, and I wanted them to be able to grow up in a way where they were closer to the land and more connected to the land, not afraid of land. And I made that call, and the first person I talked with was Karen at Heathcote. And I remember that my personal concerns were, I'm Black. My family is a non-traditional family. I'm co-parenting with a lesbian couple, and so we're raising our children together as a collective. And then also, we are a core family, but we also have, a larger kind of tribe of people that are part of our family as well, that we're helping with, raising our children, and with just, additional family who are also mostly queer folk. And so I came into this conversation with those concerns, especially having no experience with community living, and all of the weird mindsets that people have about what that's like or what that looks like. And I remember that conversation with Karen, and the way that it went, I felt so relieved and excited after we had that conversation. And she talked to me about how these were things that Heathcote specifically were prioritizing, being more open, being more multiracial, more being more diverse, really. She talked to me about her specific concerns about the idea that Heathcote was founded on these values and principles, but as a community that over time has become what it is today, and is we can't grow as a diverse community if we don't have any diversity, is what I remember her saying to me. So that, I think, is an important piece for especially those of us on the call who are white folks who are part of these community land trusts. just to remember that it is absolutely true that access to this style of living, access to the actual application process, and even just physical access, those are all points of privilege. But the reality is, to lessen those barriers, even just through conversation and outreach, is important and is something that can be achieved and is realistic. Karen has talked to me one-on-one about her desire to build diversity and make sure that Heath Cody is a really diverse and and an inclusive community. And she's been really intentional with that. And so that, even within my own right, has really excited me to help with that and build partnerships to that accord. So that's all I had to say about that. Just that I think Karen is a fantastic example of somebody who is really helping to build that bridge and make Heath Code a more inclusive and diverse space.
Thank you. Other responses, other thoughts.
I do have some things I've been thinking about in terms of school living as one small community land trust organization, but thinking about it in terms of a network of CLTs and how we can get more land transferred into the hands of communities that need them to live their vision of sovereignty, of whatever they need. So if I, look to have our feet on the ground doing the work, I'm wondering if we can strategize ways of approaching landowners and exciting them to donate their land. We're, as an organization, we're limited in what we can buy. But if there is some strategies, a networking that we can start to encourage and convince landowners to put their land into the hands of CLTs, whether it's School of Living or another, but to have, communities lined up that would be ready to utilize that land, and we could prioritize communities, people of color. So that it's just kind of a working, like a way to work it. But I don't think we can do it alone necessarily, but as a network of CLTs. Thank you.
Yeah, so Michael Ann, I hear you saying kind of like as a part of that strategy, doing work of kind of who would be in a position to donate land, and then who would be in a position to be the giftee, if you will, and doing some work to kind of cultivate both of those. Is that accurate summary?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, because I know our land committee, the thought is that we're not usually in the process of buying land and then finding communities to give it to. There have been times when there's a community and then we seek land out. And we haven't really purchased land for new community for some time, I don't think. Though we did expand land for Stellar Roots. So what am I saying? So I think there has to be a networking, like a, if we can't manage this land, is there a way we can, hand it off to the next CLT that is waiting for land to serve a community or serve a group of people that need it. Yeah, I don't have a solution in mind, but I see that we need to put feet on the ground to get land into hands that need it. I don't know if I made that clear or not.
No, that all makes sense. I appreciate it. That was pretty clear. Are there others who have thoughts? I know, Will, I see you, but I just want to hold space just in case there's anybody who hasn't talked yet, who may have some thoughts. Professor Pamela Booker, you had your, you were unmuted a while back. I want to make sure if you have anything.
Yeah, I can.
Marie, is that how you pronounce it? Marie? Okay, so can we go Professor Pamela? Is that okay to call you? Or Professor Booker, is that good?
Pamela is fine. This is
Okay.
It so happens I'm using the university's
I got you. So Pamela, Marie, and then Will.
Okay. I'm just really excited to be here, and thank you, Brother Eric. This has been really informative and educational. And I think like Derek, and I want to say peace and greetings to you because I've heard about, your occupancy there and sharing space. I have spent time with Karen on the land there at Heathcote. She and I are colleagues from Goddard, formerly. And for me, my introduction to this world of community land trusts and to some degree alternative ways of living, slow food, slow living, and all of the social justice components that surround it, Vermont, the state of Vermont really contributed measurably to my learning curve as someone who at the time was living in, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and had to hold ground with privileged white faculty who only had vision around, saving the polar bears and the penguins. And I'm like, well, for some people, that's cockroaches and ratchets. So we have to figure out how to address the spaces in which people are located. One of the things that I'm interested in is how we also address some of these community land trusts, or if any of what we're talking about in some way translates to urban communities. I'm in Newark currently, and we're also, I'm working with a community of folks who are involved with some radical urban agriculture, growing food here, urban gardeners, urban farmers, buying lots, those kinds of things. And also, there has been lots of talk about how we could in fact do or borrow from this model of cooperative living, of intentional communities in urban settings. And, again, I don't, have any specific solutions to what we're discussing. We're talking really big concepts here that are going to take more than this evening. But I just want to say that also too, I'm someone, because I've lived in New York, but also someone who goes back and forth, who has been privileged to go back and forth in between green spaces, but I'm also not a driver. So when Karen and I were really looking at how I could possibly, certainly, in the way that I have visited for maybe a few weeks at a time or something like that, could treat it as a retreat, but I never saw myself being able to make that transition into a space like Heathcote as someone who doesn't drive. And feeling really landlocked in that regard, as you were saying, a very sort of white defined space. And also, frankly, living in a time where to step off of that land, I had to consider the perils of that, right? And so would anyone else of brown or Black visible identity have to think about. So, but I do want to say that I feel that Karen's ethic and what I have heard of, what I have experienced at Heathcote, both to your point, Brother Eric, of how, there are challenges in that space, as Derek has mentioned, how to hold it. And in fact, is it, with all of this conversation now, is it so much about us necessarily moving into other people's homes, or, you know, or building our own as we reclaim land and space for ourselves. So I'll leave it there.
Marie, yeah, I was about to say, yeah, please jump in.
That was so great. Thank you, Professor Pamela. Because you had so many points that led into what I've been thinking about, and that is that part of reparations for Black folks on land is also in the acquisition of knowledge of land stewardship practices, of agrarian practices, and of really like green living practices. So Professor Pamela, what you were saying about not being able to stay for more than a retreat a few weeks at any of those places, this is what got me into thinking about it, is that I don't know anybody really before we started doing what we're doing at Stellar Roots that was able to stop their life in whatever city they came from, to try a new way of living, and you know, for longer than a week, maybe two, but I think definitely for Black and brown people, young people, and a lot of my community where I'm coming from in DC, there's lack of access to land and land practices, but then there's also like a lot of blocks to the financial resources and other resources that could be used to facilitate a training, let's say, in agriculture or land stewardship, or I don't know, timber, or growing, you know, because those trainings take time. And in that time, it's important for a lot of my community to be able to support themselves. And so one thing that I've been thinking in this call is that part of, you know, when we're talking about money and monies that we could offer to acquiring more land or putting it in the hands of Black people, is another avenue is, you know, providing some sort of grant or scholarship for Black people to actually be able to acquire some of these skill sets over a longer period of time, so that they can really, really grow in what those things are, and then potentially, you know, join a community with more purpose in that regard.
These are very interesting. So I don't know why it happened like that, but you just heard from almost back to back. You know, I'm gonna presume, and tell me if I'm wrong. All of the three people who just spoke identify as Black.
Yes.
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 All right, so I didn't want to. I presumed I stuck my neck out there, but I was okay to, you know what I mean, to deal with that. So you just heard from three Black people, and I guess I don't remember. I'm so sorry. I don't remember your name from Stellar Roots. Did you have something you want to share?
Yes, but I was enjoying, you know, your speaking and slowing it down for everyone as well.
What's your name again?
My name is Camilla.
Camilla. Okay, sorry about that.
Mostly I'm interested, obviously, in what Dr. Pamela laid out, what Marie's laid out, and giving you all our story of essentially really jumping off the side of a cliff and not even really hoping to land, but expecting to fly, and how just incredible and amazing it's been, and complexly traumatic. Fortunately, there are 7 of us who decided that we would try to navigate seeming free falling together. And it's the only way that we could have done it, in addition to the people whom we found in the hollers of the Blue Ridge Mountains, who look like us and who have land and whose grandparents have land. And strangely enough, it's like the community living aspect in these areas haven't been a culture shock, but like a re-stimulating of culture that I thought came from someplace else, but that is inherently communal, inherently rural, inherently relational. So mostly, I appreciate the Dr. Pam bridging the urban apart, because as a people, we're like a moving people somehow. We'll definitely have to talk and communicate in different ways, but we're traversing all the time, or through time or something, and so we need to cover a lot of base in order to do this. And it seems like also that there are a lot of Black and brown people who have land, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it's communal land, if not for the family being able to commune on it or have space or something like that. It's like 0.5% farmland Black owners in the US, and I'm interested in those people who haven't been able to shore up those lands, and their capacity for sharing their knowledge as well as that land, and or expanding on it and shoring it back up. I'm just really proud that everybody's here thinking together, and of that cat showing a lot of support. Derek, thank you. Yeah, that's all. That's it. Really exciting.
No, that was yeah, that's huge. So, and Will, I know you had something to say. I didn't forget, but I have to
Oh, that's all
interject
right. I
here.
don't need the time.
Cool, thank you. I think there's much to deduce from the entire conversation. I think I'm gonna call. I have to call you Professor Booker. I'm sorry, it's not my fault. It's just a respect thing. But Professor Booker said something that I think is important. We're not gonna figure it all out today, but I think what came out today are more questions and more things to explore that, I'd be happy to facilitate, but I don't need to be facilitator of any of this. But I think that some things in particular, I guess over the last 15 minutes or so, have come out that I think are important to note, namely in the context of a conversation about reparations, right? We wouldn't be having a conversation about reparations in this context if there was nothing to be repaired. If there was no connections to be made, if there was an impairment, even if even if it didn't happen in our lifetime, there are things that happen and that many And I'm going to also presume that many of the folks on the call identify themselves as white, or the world will identify you as white. And so that comes with privilege. And then it also comes with obligation, considering what you are a part of. You know what I'm saying? Not because I'm trying to be somebody's like, hey, you have to do this. You know, I'm not. But it seems that you all have signed yourselves on to something. Just merely being on the institutions that you are connected to, I think it begs more questions, and I think it requires more time to dig into those. And I want to acknowledge that we didn't even touch the last question, which was, you know, particularly Black CLT members. How can CLT active members, how could these members get some, support? Like, what does support look like? And so I lift that up to you all if we want to address it or not, because I want to respect people's time, and I don't want to go any longer than 9 o'clock. I actually intended to be done at 8:30, but it kind of jumped off at 8:30. I was like, I'm not about to stop here. But I think that it's worth having some larger conversation about what that looks like, and the roles, no matter what people's intentions are, values or ethics, we still live in what we live in. And if we're not careful, well, I think being careful, we will continue to look at the ways in which culture plays in, not just race, but how these spaces are occupied and operating. And for me, at least, something that we kind of alluded to, I'm interested in creating what I've been calling boots with others. And these boots is an acronym for Black owned and operated territories and spaces. And that means that if that wouldn't fit into the idea of like, oh, okay, well, cool, let's just meet. Let's just join community. And as multiple people have said at this point, it's not easy to just do that. And so I think it's worth a conversation about knowledge sharing and about experiential transfer that allows folks to either create their own or become part of these land trusts. Because I think it's an amazing tool. And I think that, folks have had histories of being able to, I think it was Herb who said, maybe I'm wrong, you say you've been a part of this work for about 50 years or so?
I did say that.
Yeah, I didn't want to get in trouble for saying it wrong. Give you an extra 10 years or something. But like you also offered, and I acknowledge that, offering up that you have much to share. And so if when we talk about reparatory justice, you're talking about being able to share some of those experiences so that regardless if people are like, you know what, I want to join this existing community, or I want to create one that feels a little more like what I come from, or coming up with pathways from urban context to rural ones, or creating within urban context. I think there's just much to, this is just a surface conversation, intentionally, but even more surface than I think I imagined that it would be. But yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't think we have a bunch of time to really delve into a bunch of strategy, but just getting people's reactions before I give some thoughts on what we could potentially be thinking about. But Herb, did you want to? Is it Herb?
It is Herb.
Herb.
And
sorry.
I've always got stuff. I've always got things to share. I'm not necessarily articulate very quickly, but let me, if I can, in referring to your screen here, make a couple of comments about each box. The utility of the CLT approach, establishing continued request for reparatory justice. So I've got a knowledge of the history of CLTs. One of the first CLTs in America, New Communities in Georgia, was started by a group of civil rights activists who traveled to Israel to study the kibbutz and moshav that are held by a community land trust called the Jewish National Fund to see how that structure was. Israel, by the way, was created partly or largely as a reparations to the Jewish people, funded largely by Germany. So reparations in that case didn't go to individuals, it went to a specific group of people, to to Jews. So a lot of land in Israel that is occupied by what's called the kibbutz community or the moshe of a different kind is in a community land trust model, and that was the basis for establishing some of the U.S. models. Let's see, the gold box, CLT's transition more land into black ownership and utilization. There is something of an inconsistency or incongruency in my way of thinking about referring to land as something that can be owned. I would prefer that to say transitioning more land into black leaseholdership or control. I come from this in a way that Native Americans can resonate with. Land isn't something which can actually be owned as personal property. It can only be held in trust. That's where the word trust comes from in community land trust, not from the legal concept of what a legal trust is, but from the idea that land is trustworthy, not property. The green box, what ways can CLTs help retain existing lands with black ownership? I guess we'd have to analyze to see what are the threats or pressures that would be removing existing lands that are currently in black ownership. Another historical example of the use of community land trusts was Vinoba Bhave in India, that was persuading rich landowners to give a percentage of their land to him, which he gave to individual landless people. And it didn't take very long before those parcels of land that were given to individuals were once again accumulated by a few wealthy people. And by setting up these village trusts that would hold the title to land, the title was no longer something which could be lost in a poker game or something like that. And that's as much time as I think I can spend on some historical background about community land trusts.
Well, no, thank you. And I would love the opportunity to learn more. There's a bunch that I didn't know and a little that I did personally. But I also will just speak to this before, moving on. I agree with you about the concept of ownership. I think that it is, I think that I'm absolutely in agreement with that. And I understand the complexities, because even if the trust owns it legally, right, we're within a legal context that kind of makes that difficult and it's convoluted. So I actually do agree with you on that, and can absolutely make that correction in my own, as I do in my own language, but also on these slides. But I think, needless to say, I think it's going to take continued conversations, imagination, and some very real, pointed, and coordinated tactics to decide how School of Living and other folks who are outside of the community of School of Living, I don't know everybody's affiliation, but connected to land trust or connected to a project that a land trust is supporting, to really think about. And I think I just want to give some thoughts. I want to end with some visuals. These are some of the things these are pictures that I borrowed from the work that we do. And I know that this is what some of you all are doing already, so I'm not showing you anything new, but here are, some things that folks are able to do. I believe a community of people being able to create markets that produce space for not only culture sharing, but also sharing of products and produce, and for engaging in Black joy, for education and teaching and intergenerational connectivity, as well as just, knowledge and soul train lines, of course, and and just larger, just community building on the space. And if I had my way today, in fact, I would, and maybe there'll be another opportunity to share this, but what's at the top is what we're actually working on now. It hit me a revelation a couple weeks ago that like these are the things that we're materializing in the here and now. So, working on this nursery and expanding our urban agriculture work, an aquaculture project, and establishing a food co-op. And so imagine, folks, and not just talking Black Yield Institute, but imagine folks being able to have access to rural land that contributes to this larger vision of Black land and food sovereignty. I think that a reparations frame has the potential to materialize this, but a movement of people that are coordinating and moving toward a modicum of a liberation, that an evolutionary definition of liberation. So I thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity. I know we only were able to scratch the surface. Maybe, Karen and I will, and whomever else, will have more conversation about what it looks like, or even helping to frame what you all do moving forward. But with the time that you all have allowed me, I think we've, answered some questions, raised more questions, and probably some eyebrows as well. I saw a couple eyebrows go up. And I just thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you everyone for attending. And thank you, Eric. And I think that will conclude our Zoomcast for tonight. We're going to end the recording.
Does Karen have anything? No. Bye-bye.